Empress Theodora of Byzantium, often overlooked by the pages of history, was one of the most transformative and influential figures in the Byzantine Empire. Born in the early 6th century, she rose from a background of poverty and obscurity to become one of the most powerful women in the ancient world, sharing power with her husband, Emperor Justinian I. But her story is not just one of personal ambition or political acumen. It is a story of survival, resilience, and extraordinary ability to reshape the destiny of an empire at a critical juncture in its history. Theodora's early life was far from auspicious. Her father was a bear trainer at the Hippodrome, the center of Byzantine entertainment and politics. This humble beginning was far removed from the grandeur and imperial wealth that would later surround her. She lost her father when she was just a child, and her mother struggled to provide for her family. In the harsh world of 6th century Constantinople, survival often meant entering the realm of entertainment, and Theodora, like many young women in her position, turned to the stage. She was an actress and, by some accounts, a dancer. However, the profession was fraught with stigma, and her early years were marked by scandal, as actresses were often viewed as little more than courtesans in a society that held rigid views about gender and social status. Yet, despite this, Theodora's intelligence, charm, and beauty caught the attention of key figures, and her life was about to take a turn that would alter not only her fate, but also the history of the empire itself. The turning point in Theodora's life came when she met Justinian, a man who would be both her husband and the emperor she would rule alongside. Justinian, at that time a rising star within the Byzantine court, was captivated by Theodora's charisma, intellect, and formidable presence. Despite their differences in status, Justinian was determined to marry her. The political and social ramifications of this union were enormous. Justinian, who was an ambitious and reform-minded ruler, faced considerable opposition to his relationship with Theodora, largely because of her past as an actress and the stigma attached to it. The Byzantine aristocracy, with its deep-rooted classism and disdain for those outside the nobility, saw Theodora as an unsuitable consort for the future emperor. But Justinian's love for Theodora was unwavering, and he defied the conventions of his time. Their marriage, in 525 AD, was both a personal and political statement, demonstrating Justinian's vision of a more inclusive and reform-minded empire, one that was willing to break with old prejudices for the sake of the future. It was an act of political courage, but it was also an act of profound personal loyalty, showing Justinian's confidence in Theodora's abilities. From that moment forward, Theodora would not just be Justinian's wife. She would become his closest advisor and a key player in the political and military decisions that would define his reign. The early years of their marriage were fraught with challenges. The Byzantine Empire was facing both internal unrest and external threats. The empire's borders were constantly under siege, and the political landscape was riddled with intrigue and power struggles. However, Theodora proved herself to be a formidable presence in the court, using her intelligence and strong will to shape the policies of the empire. She was not merely a passive consort, content with ceremonial duties. She was an active and engaged partner, offering counsel to Justinian on matters of state and law, particularly on issues related to the rights of women and social justice. Theodora's political influence was most evident during the Nika Riots of 532 AD, one of the most defining moments of her reign. The riots began as a series of protests against the government's heavy-handed tactics, but they quickly escalated into a full-blown rebellion, with rioters seeking to overthrow Justinian. The city of Constantinople was engulfed in flames, and the imperial palace itself was at risk of being overrun. The situation was dire, and Justinian, fearful for his life and unsure of how to respond, considered fleeing the city to preserve himself and his rule. It was in this moment of crisis that Theodora's true character emerged. While many of Justinian's advisors urged him to flee, Theodora remained resolute. In a speech that would become legendary, she told her husband that she would not abandon her throne, and she urged him to stand firm. Theodora's words were not just a plea for political stability. They were a declaration of her own determination and leadership. She famously said, "The emperor is not a man to run away, and I am not a woman who would want to live in a world without a crown." In a world that often denied women any significant political power, Theodora's decision to stay and fight marked her as a ruler in her own right. With Theodora's support, Justinian made the bold decision to fight back. He sent his generals, Belisarius and Narses, to crush the revolt, and within a few days, the rebels were defeated. The victory was not just a military one. It was a political triumph for both Justinian and Theodora. It solidified their grip on power and demonstrated Theodora's critical role in the empire's governance. Following the riot, Justinian and Theodora would go on to implement sweeping reforms that reshaped the empire, including changes to the legal system, which were later codified in the Corpus Juris Civilis, the foundation of Byzantine law that would influence legal systems for centuries. The Nika Riots were a turning point in Theodora's life, a moment when her character and leadership were no longer in question. She had proven herself to be a true partner to Justinian, both in times of peace and in times of crisis. Her legacy, however, extends far beyond this single event. As empress, she pushed for laws that protected women from forced prostitution, gave women the right to own property, and established a new standard for the treatment of women in the empire. Her commitment to justice, particularly for the marginalized and oppressed, made her a powerful advocate for social reform. Theodora's influence was felt not just in the Byzantine court, but also across the broader Mediterranean world. Her policies and her advocacy for the underprivileged earned her a reputation as a ruler who sought to create a more just and equitable society. She was not content with being a mere figurehead. She was determined to make her mark on the empire, and her actions spoke louder than words. Her legacy endures as one of the most remarkable examples of female power in history, not just for her ability to rule, but for her tireless pursuit of justice, fairness, and reform. As Empress Theodora's reign progressed, her influence continued to shape the destiny of the Byzantine Empire. She was not simply Justinian's wife. She was his closest ally, a co-ruler, and a symbol of strength and resilience. Her story, often overshadowed by the more widely remembered exploits of her husband, is a testament to her extraordinary character and her pivotal role in one of the most influential empires in history. Theodora's rise to power was extraordinary not just for the magnitude of her eventual success, but for the sheer audacity of the journey she undertook. From her humble, often brutal beginnings to becoming one of the most powerful women in Byzantine history, her path was anything but certain. In the court of Emperor Justinian I, she stood as an equal partner, influencing decisions that would shape the future of an empire. But the story of her early years is not only a tale of survival, but of transformation, both personal and political. Theodora's childhood was far removed from the grandeur of the Byzantine palace. Born around 500 AD, she was the daughter of Acacius, a bear trainer at the Hippodrome, and a mother whose name history has left mostly in obscurity. The Byzantines lived in a world where social hierarchies were rigid and class status determined nearly every aspect of life. Theodora's early life reflected the harsh realities of Constantinople's lower classes. Her father's profession, though integral to the entertainment scene at the Hippodrome, did not offer much by way of material wealth or social standing. Tragically, her father died when she was young, and Theodora, along with her sisters, was left to navigate a city brimming with opportunity, but also danger and exploitation. In a society where the options for women in her position were severely limited, Theodora turned to the theater, a profession that, while offering the possibility of financial gain and fame, also carried a reputation of scandal and degradation. The actresses of the time were often seen as little more than courtesans, their roles in public performances blurring the lines between entertainment and immorality. Theodora, however, did not see herself as bound by the shame that others sought to impose upon her. She emerged not just as a performer, but as a figure of remarkable personal ambition. Despite the stigma associated with her profession, she began to make a name for herself, not only as an actress but also as a dancer. These early years in the entertainment world were marked by hardship, but they were also formative in shaping Theodora's ability to navigate a world where manipulation, survival, and resilience were paramount. Her involvement in the arts, however, was not the only part of her early life that drew attention. Theodora's beauty, intelligence, and presence eventually caught the eye of several powerful men. One of these men was Justinian, the nephew of the reigning Emperor Justinian I, who would later rise to become the Emperor of Byzantium. At the time, Justinian was a rising star in the Byzantine court, known for his ambitious political and legal reforms. His marriage to Theodora, however, would be one of the most controversial decisions of his career. In a society where social standing was everything, their union seemed a bold, if not reckless, decision. Theodora was, after all, the daughter of a lowly bear trainer and a former actress with a questionable reputation. Yet, for Justinian, it was clear that Theodora was not just a beautiful face or a charming companion. She was a woman of intellect and depth, a woman whose strength of character would complement his own ambitions for the empire. The relationship between Theodora and Justinian was not simply one of passion, but one of mutual respect and shared vision. Despite the resistance from the court and the opposition of those who saw Theodora as an unsuitable consort, Justinian married her in 525 AD. This act of defiance against the expectations of the aristocracy was not without consequence. The marriage raised eyebrows and led to a degree of social unrest among the elite. Many nobles saw Theodora's rise as a challenge to the established order and a threat to their own power. They could not fathom how a woman of such humble origins could become the empress of one of the most powerful empires in the world. But Justinian's resolve never wavered. For him, Theodora was more than just his wife. She was his equal partner, a source of strength and wisdom in a court full of intrigue and scheming. Theodora's influence over Justinian was immediate. She was not content to be a passive figurehead or a mere ornament by her husband's side. Instead, she became an active participant in the governance of the empire. Her intelligence, ambition, and vision were clear from the start. She offered counsel on legal matters, championed social reforms, and advocated for the rights of women, a cause that would become one of her lasting legacies. Theodora's political insight was evident in the laws she helped to shape, laws that would affect not only the women of Byzantium, but also the empire's treatment of the poor, the marginalized, and the vulnerable. She was especially committed to providing women with greater protections under the law, such as banning forced prostitution and giving women more rights in divorce and inheritance. These measures demonstrated Theodora's deep sense of justice and her belief that the empire should reflect a higher moral standard. However, Theodora's political acumen would be truly tested during the Nika Riots of 532 AD. This period of civil unrest was one of the most turbulent in Justinian's reign, and it posed an existential threat to the empire. The riots began as a protest by rival factions in the Hippodrome, the two main chariot racing teams, but they quickly escalated into a full-blown rebellion. The people of Constantinople, enraged by Justinian's reforms and the perceived corruption of his government, began calling for the overthrow of the emperor. The situation grew dire when the rioters seized control of much of the city, and the imperial palace itself was under threat. The city was set aflame, and Justinian found himself on the brink of losing not only his throne but his life. It was at this critical moment that Theodora's leadership was tested. While Justinian hesitated, unsure of what course of action to take, Theodora remained resolute. She urged her husband to stand firm, refusing to leave the city despite the overwhelming threat to their lives. In a moment of unparalleled bravery, Theodora delivered a speech that would become legendary. She argued that an emperor should never flee in the face of danger, and she famously declared, "The emperor is not a man to run away, and I am not a woman who would want to live in a world without a crown." Her words were not just a call to arms, but a declaration of her own strength, her refusal to be intimidated by the forces that sought to tear apart the empire. In the face of potential destruction, Theodora's unwavering resolve bolstered Justinian's courage, and together they devised a strategy to crush the rebellion. With Theodora's support, Justinian ordered his generals, Belisarius and Narses, to take action. The result was a brutal suppression of the rioters. Thousands were killed, and the rebellion was quashed. The victory solidified Justinian's reign, but it also cemented Theodora's place in history. She had proven herself not only as a political advisor, but as a ruler in her own right, one who could face adversity and triumph. Her leadership during the Nika Riots marked a turning point in her reign. She had transformed from a woman of uncertain origins into a figure of immense political power and influence. She would continue to shape the empire, her legacy enduring as one of the most remarkable female rulers in history. Theodora's influence on Justinian and the Byzantine Empire cannot be overstated. In an era where women were often relegated to the margins of history, she defied all expectations and carved out a space of authority and power. From a background of hardship and scandal, Theodora rose to become the empress of one of the greatest empires in history, shaping the course of Byzantine politics and law for generations to come. As the Byzantine Empire entered the 6th century, it faced an era of significant political, military, and social upheaval. The reign of Emperor Justinian I was marked by a relentless pursuit of legal, administrative, and territorial reforms aimed at restoring the empire to its former glory. Yet, this ambition was not without its challenges, both internal and external. Amidst these turbulent times, Theodora stood as a pillar of strength and resolve, shaping the destiny of the empire alongside her husband, not merely as a passive consort, but as a decisive force in imperial politics. Her influence in the courts, her vision for the future, and her role in the most dramatic moments of Justinian's reign positioned her as not just the empress, but a ruler in her own right. One of the most consequential chapters of her life unfolded during the so-called Nika Riots of 532 AD, an event that would define her legacy and solidify her political stature. The Nika Riots erupted as a response to the increasing dissatisfaction with Justinian's government. While the emperor had garnered significant achievements during his reign, including ambitious construction projects like the Hagia Sophia and the codification of Roman law, his policies also provoked resentment. His heavy taxation, the imposition of reforms on the military, and his handling of certain religious disputes had alienated large segments of the population. The disturbances initially began as a rivalry between two chariot racing factions, the Blues and the Greens, which were essentially the sports clubs of Constantinople. These factions were more than just teams. They had substantial political and social influence, with their support among different segments of society reflecting deeper divisions within the empire. What began as an argument at the Hippodrome rapidly escalated into something far more dangerous. The tension reached its peak when both factions, once adversaries, joined forces to protest against Justinian's policies. Fueled by political and social frustrations, they took to the streets, calling for the emperor's overthrow. The city descended into chaos as the protesters, who had support from significant segments of the public, turned violent. The rioters seized parts of the city, sacked important buildings, and set fire to sections of the imperial palace. The streets of Constantinople became a battlefield, and the emperor's position seemed increasingly untenable. With the city in flames and rebellion at the gates, Justinian found himself in a precarious situation. The emperor's advisors urged him to flee the city, to abandon the capital in the face of insurrection, but Justinian hesitated. The decision he faced was not one of mere survival. It was a choice between upholding his vision of an empire under his rule or surrendering to the chaos that threatened to undo everything he had worked for. At this crucial moment, it was Theodora who demonstrated extraordinary leadership. While many in the court, including some of Justinian's closest military commanders, advised the emperor to escape, Theodora stood firm. In a speech that has since entered the annals of history as one of the most powerful moments of her reign, she implored her husband not to abandon his throne. She argued that an emperor must not run from his responsibilities. even in the face of certain death, and that it would be a dishonor to retreat. Theodora's words were not simply a plea for political survival. They were a testament to her unshakable resolve and her understanding of the imperial role. In her mind, the throne was not just a symbol of power, but the means through which she could enact the reforms that she so deeply believed in. Theodora's speech famously included the declaration, "The emperor is not a man to run away, and I am not a woman who would want to live in a world without a crown." For a woman of her background, one who had been born into poverty, raised in a world of stigma, and risen through the ranks of society to become the empress. These words encapsulated not only her determination, but her sense of destiny. Theodora was not only Justinian's wife. She was his equal, his confidant, and his political partner. Her intervention in this crisis was not an isolated act of courage, but a demonstration of her unflinching commitment to her vision of a strong, unified Byzantine Empire. Theodora's resolve carried weight. Despite the looming threat to their lives, Justinian chose to remain in the city. With her by his side, he ordered a brutal military response. The imperial forces, led by General Belisarius, launched a decisive assault on the rioters, using overwhelming force to crush the rebellion. The outcome was swift and violent. The rebels, caught off guard by the imperial counterattack, were defeated with brutal efficiency. Thousands of insurgents were killed, and the city was quickly brought under control. The Nika Riots ended as suddenly as they had begun, but the political consequences would resonate for years to come. In the aftermath of the riots, Justinian's rule was reaffirmed, but it was Theodora who emerged as the true political force behind the throne. Her bravery and leadership during the crisis had cemented her status as more than a mere consort. She had proven herself to be an indispensable partner in governance, a woman whose intelligence, insight, and decisiveness were just as crucial as Justinian's military acumen. The riots had not only secured Justinian's reign, but had also elevated Theodora to the forefront of Byzantine politics. No longer seen as a woman of questionable origins or social status, she was now regarded as an empress with the political acumen and courage to shape the empire's future. In the wake of the Nika riots, Theodora's influence over Justinian grew. The emperor, who had previously been a more conventional ruler, now recognized the full extent of his wife's capabilities. Their partnership became a defining characteristic of the reign. Theodora was not content to simply be a passive figurehead, as so many women in her position had been in the past. Instead, she took an active role in the formulation of imperial policies. She was particularly passionate about legal reform, advocating for laws that would protect the rights of women and the poor, and challenging the entrenched power structures that perpetuated inequality. One of Theodora's most significant contributions was her role in the creation of new laws aimed at protecting women. Under her influence, the empire introduced measures to combat forced prostitution and to give women more rights in marriage and divorce. She established laws that allowed women to own property, a revolutionary idea in a world where women had often been treated as property themselves. These reforms, which were groundbreaking at the time, were part of Theodora's broader vision of social justice, one that sought to balance the scales of power in a society that had long marginalized women and the lower classes. While her legal reforms were among her most enduring achievements, Theodora's role in the imperial court extended far beyond lawmaking. She was instrumental in advising Justinian on matters of governance, diplomacy, and military strategy. Her advice was not limited to domestic concerns. She also played a significant role in shaping the empire's foreign policy. Theodora understood that the survival of the Byzantine Empire depended not only on internal stability, but on its ability to navigate the complex web of relations with other powers in the Mediterranean world. Whether dealing with the Persians in the east, the Germanic tribes to the west, or the burgeoning power of the Islamic caliphates, Theodora's influence was felt in every corner of the empire. Through it all, she remained a woman of unparalleled vision and strength, a figure who had defied the odds to reach the pinnacle of power, and who had used her position to change the course of history. Her legacy, while often overshadowed by that of her husband, Justinian, remains one of the most remarkable in the history of the Byzantine Empire. Theodora's actions during the Nika Riots, her political acumen, and her advocacy for social justice ensure that her name endures as one of the most formidable and influential women in the ancient world. She was not just an empress. She was a force of nature whose impact on the Byzantine Empire can still be felt today. The reign of Emperor Justinian I was one of the most transformative periods in the history of the Byzantine Empire, and while much of the attention often falls on his military campaigns and legal reforms, the contributions of his wife, Empress Theodora, were equally pivotal. Her influence over the empire was not just as a queen consort, but as a political force in her own right. After the Nika Riots of 532 AD, when Theodora had decisively urged her husband to stay and fight rather than flee, her role in shaping the future of the Byzantine Empire would only deepen. It was during the latter half of Justinian's reign that Theodora began to leave a lasting mark on the empire's policies, especially in terms of social reform and the protection of vulnerable groups within the society. As the years progressed, Theodora became a tireless advocate for women's rights in an era where women were still largely marginalized, particularly in the patriarchal structures of the ancient world. She was not simply interested in securing her own power or prestige, but used her position to challenge deeply entrenched social and legal norms that had long restricted the lives of women, the poor, and the marginalized. The empress's role in the imperial court was one that saw her engaging in the administration of law, the enforcement of social reforms, and, crucially, the creation of new legislative frameworks aimed at providing protection to those who had previously been treated as little more than property. Theodora's legal reforms were groundbreaking in the context of her time. She successfully lobbied for laws that banned forced prostitution, which was a widespread issue in the Byzantine Empire. In an era where many women were pushed into lives of servitude and exploitation, Theodora made a direct and impassioned effort to change the prevailing attitudes toward the treatment of women. She ensured that women had more freedom to own property and, in some cases, were granted the ability to divorce their husbands on the grounds of mistreatment or abuse, a significant departure from the deeply patriarchal structures that otherwise dominated marriage laws. These reforms were not simply a matter of legal text. They were part of a much broader social vision that Theodora pursued with relentless determination. One of the most notable and transformative aspects of Theodora's reign was her commitment to the protection and welfare of the lower classes. At a time when the upper echelons of society were obsessed with wealth and prestige, Theodora understood the importance of social stability and cohesion. Her laws aimed to protect not only women, but also the poor and disenfranchised. She pushed for measures that would help improve the living conditions of the poorest citizens of Constantinople and the broader empire, many of whom lived in squalid conditions. Her reforms extended to the justice system, where she worked to ensure that the judiciary was fairer and that the rich and powerful could no longer wield the law as a tool of oppression against the lower classes. Theodora's vision was one of a more just empire, one where the needs of the marginalized could no longer be ignored by the ruling class. Despite these progressive policies, Theodora faced significant opposition from conservative elements within the Byzantine court. Her reforms were viewed by some as radical and threatening to the traditional order of the empire. Her critics, particularly among the nobility, saw her as an upstart who was trying to overturn centuries of established customs. The empress's social policies, while championing equality for women and the poor, were not always met with enthusiasm, particularly from the wealthier elites who had little incentive to dismantle the systems of privilege that had long benefited them. Many viewed her as a challenge to the status quo, and her growing power within the court stirred resentment among those who wished to maintain their privileged positions. Even in the face of these challenges, Theodora never backed down. Her sharp political instincts and her dedication to her cause meant that she was able to push through laws and reforms that would have seemed impossible under any other circumstances. Her strength of character and her unwavering commitment to social justice were central to the imperial administration. She was not just an advisor to Justinian, but an active participant in the day-to-day governance of the empire. Theodora's influence was not confined to the royal palace, but extended to the imperial bureaucracy, where she worked to ensure that the reforms she had fought for were enacted and enforced. In addition to her efforts on behalf of women and the poor, Theodora also worked tirelessly to promote religious tolerance within the empire. Though Justinian's reign was largely defined by his efforts to unite the empire under Christianity, Theodora understood the complex web of religious tensions that existed within the empire. While Justinian pushed for religious uniformity, particularly through the implementation of the Nicene Creed, Theodora advocated for a more tolerant approach toward different sects of Christianity, especially the Monophysites. She was sympathetic to their beliefs and often used her influence to protect them from persecution by the more orthodox factions within the empire. This aspect of Theodora's reign showed her pragmatism and her willingness to consider the empire's unity in terms of social and religious inclusivity, rather than uniformity. One of the most visible symbols of Theodora's influence and lasting legacy was the dramatic construction projects that took place during Justinian's reign, most notably the Hagia Sophia. While the Hagia Sophia is often seen as the product of Justinian's ambition to assert Byzantine supremacy and Christian orthodoxy, Theodora's role in its construction should not be underestimated. The Empress was not just a passive observer of this monumental project. She was deeply involved in its conception and execution. The Hagia Sophia, once completed, stood as a symbol of both the empire's grandeur and Theodora's political and religious vision. It was a space that embodied the strength and unity of the empire, as well as its ability to withstand challenges both from within and without. Theodora's contributions to the design and patronage of the Hagia Sophia were integral to ensuring that it was not just a religious center, but a lasting monument to the imperial power that she had helped shape. Despite the challenges she faced throughout her reign, Theodora's legacy endures as one of the most influential figures in Byzantine history. She was not just an empress consort, but a ruler in her own right, whose political acumen, social policies, and vision for a more just empire would shape the course of Byzantine history for centuries to come. While her husband, Justinian, may have been the more prominent figure in the empire's military and administrative successes, Theodora's contribution to the empire's social and legal framework cannot be overstated. The reforms she introduced, her efforts to protect women, the poor, and the religiously persecuted, and her tireless advocacy for justice have made her one of the most remarkable female rulers in history. Even today, her legacy as a pioneering leader, whose influence transcended the traditional roles assigned to women in the ancient world, continues to inspire those who believe in the power of governance to effect real and lasting change. As the Byzantine Empire entered the second half of the 6th century, the reign of Emperor Justinian I was reaching its zenith. His military successes, territorial ambitions, and legal reforms, particularly the compilation of the Corpus Juris Civilis, became the hallmark of his rule. However, beneath the surface of these monumental achievements, the true power dynamics of the empire rested not solely with Justinian, but also with his wife, Empress Theodora. Her role in shaping the policies and future of the empire became increasingly pronounced, with her contributions reaching far beyond the courts and ceremonial duties typically expected of a queen. Theodora's leadership was integral to Justinian's successes, and her influence permeated all aspects of governance, political, social, and cultural. But perhaps it was in her advocacy for the marginalized and her reforms to the legal and social systems that Theodora's legacy truly shines. While Justinian's reign is often remembered for its military campaigns, such as the reconquests of North Africa, Italy, and parts of Spain, these campaigns were not just military undertakings, but part of a larger vision for the restoration of the Roman Empire. Theodora, ever the pragmatic and politically astute partner, shared Justinian's ambitions, but also saw the need for significant reforms within the empire's own borders. In an empire that was vast and culturally diverse, Theodora recognized that political stability could not be achieved solely through military conquest or imperial decree. The true strength of the empire lay in its ability to maintain social cohesion and justice, and Theodora set out to achieve this by advocating for laws that directly addressed issues of inequality and human rights, issues that had long been overlooked or ignored. One of the first areas that Theodora focused on was the protection of women's rights. In a world where women's legal status was often severely limited, Theodora worked tirelessly to change the laws to ensure that women had more freedom and protection under the law. Before Theodora's reforms, women in the Byzantine Empire had few rights. Most were considered the property of their husbands or fathers, unable to own property in their own name, and subject to laws that made it difficult for them to leave abusive marriages. Theodora's legal reforms aimed to rectify this injustice and grant women more autonomy over their lives. Her most significant achievement in this area was the passage of laws that allowed women to own property in their own right. This was a groundbreaking change in the Byzantine legal system, as it gave women more control over their financial futures and allowed them to participate more fully in the economic life of the empire. Theodora also implemented laws that made divorce easier for women, especially in cases where the marriage was abusive. This allowed women to leave marriages where they were being mistreated and provided legal recourse for women who had been wronged by their husbands. Furthermore, Theodora sought to protect women from being coerced into prostitution, a common and tragic fate for many women in the empire. She outlawed the practice of forcing women into prostitution and took steps to ensure that women who had been victims of this crime were given a second chance at a life free from exploitation. In addition to her work on behalf of women, Theodora's reforms extended to the most vulnerable and marginalized people in Byzantine society: the poor, the sick, and the outcast. Her commitment to social justice was a central tenet of her reign, and she worked to ensure that the empire's poorest citizens were given the protections they needed to survive in a world that often viewed them as expendable. Theodora understood that the stability of the empire depended on the well-being of its people, and she was determined to address the systemic inequalities that left many of her subjects in poverty. One of Theodora's most significant contributions to social justice was her advocacy for the poor. She implemented policies aimed at alleviating the suffering of the destitute, ensuring that they were provided with food, shelter, and medical care. She established charitable institutions throughout the empire, including hospitals and orphanages, where the poor and the sick could receive care. Theodora's compassion for the poor extended beyond just the city of Constantinople. She worked to ensure that her reforms reached the farthest corners of the empire. She understood that a prosperous empire was not one where wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few, but one where all of its citizens had access to basic human needs. Beyond her work on behalf of women and the poor, Theodora was also a passionate advocate for the protection of religious minorities. In a time when religious disputes often tore empires apart, Theodora sought to ease tensions between different Christian sections. Although Justinian's reign was marked by his determination to enforce the Nicene Creed as the official doctrine of the empire, Theodora's stance was more inclusive. She was known for her tolerance toward the Monophysites, a Christian sect that rejected the orthodox belief in the dual nature of Christ. The Monophysites, who had been persecuted by the more orthodox factions of the Byzantine Church, found an unlikely protector in Theodora. Her intervention on their behalf helped to shield them from persecution and allowed them to practice their faith more freely. This was a remarkable act of religious tolerance, given the context of the time, when religious differences were often seen as a direct challenge to imperial authority. Theodora's religious tolerance was not confined to Christianity alone. She also worked to protect the rights of the Jewish community within the empire. The Jewish population of the Byzantine Empire, while generally tolerated, had long been subject to discrimination and occasional persecution. Theodora worked to ensure that the Jews were treated with respect and fairness, pushing for laws that protected their rights and allowed them to practice their faith without fear of reprisal. This commitment to religious freedom was one of the defining features of Theodora's reign and set her apart from other rulers of the time, who were often much less tolerant of religious minorities. While Theodora's reforms in law and social policy were remarkable, her influence was not limited to the realm of legislation. Her role in the imperial court was a model of political acumen. Theodora was deeply involved in the day-to-day administration of the empire and provided Justinian with sound advice on matters of governance. Her counsel was sought on everything from military strategy to diplomacy, and she was known for her sharp intellect and her ability to navigate the complex political landscape of the empire. Theodora's political skill and her deep understanding of the inner workings of the empire made her an invaluable asset to Justinian. In the arena of diplomacy, Theodora played a crucial role in maintaining the stability of the empire's foreign relations. She was instrumental in fostering alliances with key powers in the Mediterranean world, including the Ostrogoths and the Franks. Theodora's diplomatic efforts helped to ensure that the Byzantine Empire remained strong and secure, even as it faced threats from both the East and the West. Her ability to influence foreign policy was a testament to her diplomatic acumen and her recognition of the importance of maintaining peace with the empire's neighbors. Despite her many achievements, Theodora's life was not without personal challenges. Her reign as empress was marked by personal loss and tragedy. One of the greatest sorrows of Theodora's life was the death of her only daughter, who passed away at a young age. This loss, though deeply personal, did not deter Theodora from continuing her work in the service of the empire. She remained steadfast in her commitment to her people and her role as empress, even in the face of adversity. Theodora's health, too, began to deteriorate in the later years of her reign. She was known to suffer from various illnesses, and her physical condition became more frail over time. However, even as her health declined, she continued to play an active role in the governance of the empire. Theodora's resilience in the face of personal hardship only added to her legendary status as one of the most formidable and influential women in Byzantine history. In the final years of her life, Theodora's contributions to the empire were recognized and celebrated. She was remembered not only for her political skill, her legal reforms, and her advocacy for social justice, but also for her unwavering commitment to the welfare of the people. Theodora's legacy as a ruler who changed the course of history remains intact, a testament to her strength, her vision, and her ability to rise above the expectations of her time. Even today, her name stands as a symbol of the power of leadership, compassion, and reform in a world that often overlooked the potential of women in positions of power. The Byzantine Empire under Justinian I is often remembered for its grandiose ambitions and significant achievements, but the reign of his wife, Empress Theodora, was equally transformative. Her legacy as a ruler was not merely defined by her role as consort to the emperor, but by her direct influence over the governance of the empire. Theodora's ability to navigate the complexities of court politics, her involvement in legal reforms, and her tireless advocacy for the marginalized left an indelible mark on Byzantine society. While Justinian was focused on military campaigns, territorial expansion, and consolidating imperial power, Theodora's contributions extended far beyond the battlefield, shaping the social fabric of the empire. Theodora's rise to power was extraordinary given her humble origins. Born to a father who worked as a bear trainer at the Hippodrome in Constantinople, and having lost her father at an early age, Theodora was thrust into a harsh world. As a young woman, she found herself working as an actress, a profession viewed with disdain in Byzantine society. Actors, especially women, were often equated with courtesans and were seen as little more than sexual commodities. Despite the stigma surrounding her profession, Theodora demonstrated remarkable intelligence and resilience, quickly rising above the limitations imposed by her social status. She cultivated a reputation for her beauty, wit, and intellectual capabilities, catching the eye of men in the Byzantine elite, including the young Justinian. Justinian's interest in Theodora was not only romantic, but deeply political. His choice to marry Theodora, despite her background, was a declaration of his belief in her abilities and a break from the traditional norms of Byzantine aristocracy, which looked down on women of lower birth. Their union, though controversial, proved to be a formidable partnership that helped shape the future of the empire. Theodora, once seen as an outsider, would soon become an integral part of Justinian's court, providing counsel, wisdom, and leadership when needed. The Nika Riots of 532 AD were a defining moment in both Justinian and Theodora's reign. When a popular uprising broke out, spurred by discontent with Justinian's rule, the capital of Constantinople was thrown into chaos. The rioters, consisting of chariot racing factions, began attacking the government and imperial palace, demanding that Justinian be removed from power. The violence escalated quickly, and soon, the very existence of the imperial family was at risk. Theodora, despite the pleas of her advisors, refused to flee. Instead, she delivered a powerful speech to Justinian, urging him to stay and fight. Her famous words, "The emperor is not a man to run away, and I am not a woman who would want to live in a world without a crown," not only solidified her position as a political force, but also demonstrated her courage in the face of danger. Theodora's determination was crucial in Justinian's decision to stand firm. With her unwavering support, the emperor ordered a military counterattack against the rebels. General Belisarius led the charge, and within days, the revolt was crushed. The riots were a victory not just for Justinian, but for Theodora as well, as her leadership during this crisis established her as a formidable ruler in her own right. This event also marked the beginning of her deeper involvement in imperial politics, with Theodora continuing to offer her counsel on various matters of governance, law, and diplomacy. In the years that followed, Theodora became known for her social policies, particularly her advocacy for the rights of women and the lower classes. One of her primary concerns was the treatment of women in Byzantine society. Before her reforms, women in the empire had limited legal rights and were often seen as property rather than as autonomous individuals. Theodora used her position to push through legislation that protected women from exploitation and abuse. One of her most notable achievements was the outlawing of forced prostitution. At the time, prostitution was a significant issue, particularly among the poor and vulnerable women of Constantinople. By criminalizing the practice, Theodora gave women a chance to escape a life of abuse and servitude. Theodora's efforts also extended to marriage and divorce laws. In a society where women had few rights in marriage, Theodora implemented reforms that gave women more autonomy. She pushed for the right of women to initiate divorce proceedings, especially in cases of abuse. These reforms not only improved the lives of women in the empire, but also set a precedent for future legal changes in the Byzantine world. Her laws provided women with greater opportunities for independence, protection, and self-determination, something rare for women in the ancient world. Additionally, Theodora took significant steps to improve the condition of the poor and destitute in the empire. The Byzantine Empire was a vast, sprawling entity with a significant gap between the rich elite and the impoverished masses. Theodora's reforms aimed to close this gap, at least to some extent. She advocated for the establishment of hospitals and orphanages, ensuring that the sick and the vulnerable had access to care. She also created charitable institutions to assist the poor, including subsidies for those who were struggling to survive in the harsh conditions of Constantinople. Theodora's approach to the empire's legal and social issues was not simply a matter of charity, but a reflection of her vision for a more just society. She recognized that the empire's strength lay not only in its military might, but also in the well-being of its people. Her reforms aimed to alleviate the suffering of the marginalized and ensure that the benefits of imperial prosperity reached beyond the walls of the palaces. Her vision was one of fairness and compassion, where justice was accessible to all, regardless of their social standing. Despite her progressive reforms, Theodora faced significant opposition from the conservative elements of the Byzantine court. The aristocracy, accustomed to power and privilege, viewed her rise to prominence with disdain. Her policies, particularly those concerning the rights of women and the poor, challenged the established social order. However, Theodora's unflinching determination and political skill allowed her to push through these reforms. She was not just a figurehead in Justinian's court, but a woman who wielded real power and influence. Her legal reforms, particularly in the areas of women's rights and social welfare, were groundbreaking and set the stage for future developments in the Byzantine legal system. Theodora's influence was not confined to the realm of law and social reform. She also played a crucial role in the empire's diplomacy. As empress, she understood that maintaining peace with the empire's neighbors was just as important as military conquest. Her diplomatic efforts were integral in maintaining the empire's stability, particularly in relation to the Persians, the Ostrogoths, and other powers in the Mediterranean. Theodora's ability to navigate the complex political landscape of the time helped to ensure that the Byzantine Empire remained secure and prosperous throughout much of Justinian's reign. Moreover, Theodora's religious tolerance was an important aspect of her reign. Although the empire was largely Christian and Justinian himself was a staunch defender of the Nicene Creed, Theodora was known for her more inclusive approach to religious diversity. She championed the rights of religious minorities, particularly the Monophysites, who had been persecuted under Justinian's policies. Theodora used her position to shield them from oppression, demonstrating her commitment to religious tolerance in a time of intense doctrinal conflict within Christianity. This stance not only helped to mitigate religious tensions, but also reinforced Theodora's image as a ruler who valued justice and fairness for all her subjects, regardless of their beliefs. Theodora's legacy as a ruler is remarkable not just for the reforms she introduced or the policies she enacted, but for the way in which she transformed the role of women in Byzantine society. She was a woman who defied the expectations of her time, rising from a humble background to become one of the most powerful women in the ancient world. Her role as empress was one of immense significance, not only because of her partnership with Justinian, but because of the personal contributions she made to the empire's legal, social, and political landscape. By the time of her death in 548 AD, Theodora had left an indelible mark on the Byzantine Empire. Her reforms in women's rights, her efforts to protect the poor, and her commitment to religious tolerance ensured that her legacy endured long after her death. In many ways, Theodora set the standard for what it meant to be a female ruler in a male-dominated world, demonstrating that women could hold real power, shape policy, and leave a lasting impact on history. Theodora's reign, though often overshadowed by the more prominent figure of Justinian, stands as one of the most influential in Byzantine history, and her influence continues to resonate to this day. The Byzantine Empire in the 6th century was a realm in transition, poised between its classical past and its medieval future. Under Emperor Justinian I, the empire sought to restore the grandeur of Rome, launching an ambitious series of military campaigns that aimed to reclaim lost territories. But while Justinian's military and administrative reforms were significant, it was his wife, Empress Theodora, who would become one of the most influential figures in shaping the empire's legal, social, and religious landscape. Her contributions extended beyond her role as a supportive consort to become a driving force in Byzantine governance. Theodora's complex political acumen, her deep sense of social justice, and her advocacy for women's rights established her as one of the most powerful women in the history of the Byzantine Empire. Born into relative obscurity, Theodora's rise from humble beginnings to empress was nothing short of extraordinary. Her father, Acacius, was a bear trainer at the Hippodrome in Constantinople, and her early years were spent in poverty, exposed to the harsh realities of life in the Byzantine capital. After the death of her father, Theodora, along with her sisters, was left to navigate a society where women, especially those of lower birth, had limited opportunities. Her initial foray into the public was through the world of theater, a profession often associated with immorality and debauchery. Yet, it was within this arena that Theodora developed the intelligence, charisma, and political savvy that would ultimately propel her to the imperial throne. Despite the stigma associated with her profession, Theodora used her position as an actress and dancer to cultivate connections with the Byzantine elite. Her beauty charm, and sharp intellect caught the attention of prominent figures, and it was not long before she attracted the eye of Justinian, the ambitious nephew of Emperor Justinian I. Their relationship, though controversial due to her low status, soon blossomed into marriage. For Justinian, Theodora was not just a beautiful woman, but an equal partner who shared his vision of a stronger, more unified empire. Though their marriage was met with resistance from the Byzantine nobility, who viewed Theodora's rise as a threat to the social order, it was ultimately a partnership that would redefine the course of Byzantine history. After their marriage in 525 AD, Theodora's influence over Justinian became more pronounced. Though she had no formal title at first, she quickly became a central figure in the court, offering advice and counsel on matters of state. Justinian, who was known for his legal and administrative reforms, recognized the intelligence and political acumen of his wife and began to consult her regularly. Theodora was deeply involved in the creation of the Corpus Juris Civilis, the codification of Roman law that would have a lasting impact on European legal systems for centuries. But her influence was not limited to the realm of law. Theodora's political vision encompassed social reform, women's rights, and religious tolerance, areas where her legacy would be felt long after her death. The Nika Riots of 532 AD were a defining moment in Theodora's life, one that solidified her status as a co-ruler and cemented her reputation as a woman of exceptional courage and political savvy. The riots, which began as a conflict between the chariot racing factions in Constantinople, soon escalated into a full-scale revolt. The demonstrators, enraged by Justinian's policies and taxes, called for the overthrow of the emperor. The violence reached its peak when large sections of the city were burned, and the imperial palace was besieged. Justinian, fearful for his life, was advised by his court to flee the city and seek refuge elsewhere. However, Theodora's reaction to the crisis was one of unshakable resolve. In one of the most iconic moments of her reign, Theodora delivered a stirring speech to her husband, urging him not to flee. She reminded him that emperors should not run from their responsibilities, even in the face of death. Her famous words, "The emperor is not a man to run away, and I am not a woman who would want to live in a world without a crown," not only inspired Justinian to stay and face the rebellion, but also illustrated her indomitable spirit and determination to maintain the integrity of the Byzantine Empire. With her encouragement, Justinian ordered a violent crackdown on the rioters, and the rebellion was swiftly put down. Thousands were killed, and the Nika Riots came to an abrupt end. The aftermath of the riots was a turning point in Theodora's reign. Her intervention had not only saved Justinian's throne, but had also solidified her position as an equal ruler. Theodora's role in the suppression of the Nika Riots marked the beginning of her more active involvement in the empire's governance. Over the coming years, she would continue to assert her influence, particularly in areas related to social justice and the protection of women. Her advocacy for women's rights, in particular, became one of the defining features of her reign. Theodora's legal reforms were groundbreaking, particularly in the realm of women's rights. Before her reforms, women in the Byzantine Empire had few legal protections and were often treated as little more than property of their husbands or fathers. Theodora, however, used her power to push for a series of reforms that would provide women with greater autonomy and legal protection. She pushed for laws that allowed women to own property, a significant step in a society where women had little control over their financial futures. These laws granted women greater independence, enabling them to manage their wealth and secure their livelihoods, even in the absence of a male protector. One of Theodora's most important achievements was her efforts to combat the widespread practice of forced prostitution in the empire. In a society where many women, especially those from the lower classes, were coerced into prostitution to survive, Theodora's efforts to criminalize the practice were a bold and transformative move. She passed legislation that made it illegal for women to be sold into prostitution, ensuring that women who had been victims of exploitation would be given a chance to rebuild their lives. This was a significant reform, as it addressed a social issue that had long been ignored or accepted by the ruling elite. Additionally, Theodora pushed for changes to the marriage laws. She advocated for the right of women to initiate divorce proceedings, particularly in cases where they were victims of abuse. This reform allowed women to escape abusive marriages and gave them legal recourse when they were mistreated by their husbands. It was a radical departure from the patriarchal norms of the time, where women had little say in the dissolution of their marriages. Through these reforms, Theodora not only improved the lives of women in the empire, but also set a precedent for future generations of women to fight for their rights. Beyond her work for women, Theodora also championed the cause of the poor and the disadvantaged. The Byzantine Empire, like many other ancient empires, was characterized by a stark divide between the wealthy elite and the impoverished masses. Theodora, aware of the deep social inequalities within the empire, implemented policies designed to alleviate the suffering of the poor. She established charitable institutions, including orphanages and hospitals, where the sick and vulnerable could receive care. These efforts were a reflection of Theodora's deeply held belief in social justice and the idea that the empire's prosperity should be shared by all, not just the elite. Theodora's influence extended to religious matters as well. Despite Justinian's more orthodox stance on Christianity, Theodora was known for her tolerance and empathy toward religious minorities. She advocated for the protection of the Monophysites, a Christian sect that rejected the orthodox belief in the dual nature of Christ. Under her influence, the Monophysites were granted protection from persecution, allowing them to practice their faith more freely. This stance on religious tolerance was a testament to Theodora's pragmatic approach to governance and her desire to maintain unity within the empire, even if it meant embracing diversity within the Christian community. Theodora's contributions to the Byzantine Empire were not just limited to legal reforms or social policies. She also played a crucial role in the empire's military strategy and diplomatic relations. While Justinian focused much of his attention on military campaigns, Theodora understood that the empire's security depended not only on military might, but also on diplomacy and strategic alliances. She was instrumental in negotiating alliances with neighboring powers and in ensuring that the empire remained stable in a turbulent geopolitical environment. Despite her many accomplishments, Theodora's life was not without personal challenges. She faced opposition from the conservative factions within the Byzantine court, who saw her rise to power as a threat to their influence. Her health also began to deteriorate in the later years of her reign, and she faced the personal loss of her only daughter, which was a heavy blow. Yet, through it all, Theodora remained steadfast in her commitment to the empire and its people. Theodora passed away in 548 AD, but her legacy lived on long after her death. Her reforms in women's rights, social justice, and religious tolerance had a lasting impact on the Byzantine Empire and on history as a whole. Theodora was not just an empress. She was a powerful political figure whose contributions to the empire helped shape its future for centuries. Her reign marked a turning point in the role of women in governance, and her example continues to inspire those who believe in the potential of women to shape the world around them. In the annals of Byzantine history, Theodora's name is forever etched as a ruler who overcame the odds, broke barriers, and left a legacy that continues to resonate in the modern world. The reign of Emperor Justinian I is one of the most celebrated in Byzantine history, and his ambitious efforts to restore the grandeur of the Roman Empire have long been admired. However, the significance of his reign is not solely tied to military conquests or monumental architectural achievements. A critical but often understated part of this legacy was the role played by his wife, Empress Theodora. Her contributions to the empire were multifaceted, with profound impact on politics, law, society, and even religion. What is striking about Theodora is not only her political influence, but also the way in which she helped shape the moral and legal fabric of the Byzantine Empire, championing the rights of marginalized groups and reshaping the social order in a way that would reverberate for centuries. Theodora's journey to the imperial throne is extraordinary in its own right. Born into modest circumstances in Constantinople, she was the daughter of a bear trainer at the hippodrome, and her early life was marked by poverty and hardship. The death of her father left Theodora and her family in precarious circumstances, and as a young woman, she found herself navigating a world that offered few opportunities to women of her status. She began her career as an actress, a profession that was often associated with scandal and immorality in Byzantine society. While this occupation certainly placed her at odds with the established elite, it also provided her with the opportunity to refine her intellect and charisma. It was in this environment that she began to attract the attention of prominent men in Byzantine society, including Justinian, the nephew of Emperor Justinian I, who would eventually become her husband. Theodora's rise from an actress to the empress of one of the most powerful empires in the world was not only a personal triumph, but a political statement in itself. The marriage between Justinian and Theodora, though initially controversial due to her low status, eventually proved to be a powerful partnership. For Justinian, Theodora was not simply a consort, but a trusted advisor and a crucial partner in the governance of the empire. Theodora's intelligence, decisiveness, and political astuteness allowed her to play an active role in shaping the policies of the empire, and her influence was especially felt in areas related to social reform and legal rights. One of the most significant aspects of Theodora's legacy was her work on behalf of women's rights. In the Byzantine Empire, women were largely regarded as property of their husbands or fathers, with little control over their personal or financial affairs. Theodora, however, used her position to advocate for women's legal and social rights, particularly in areas where they had long been marginalized. Under her influence, laws were passed that gave women the right to own property, allowing them to have more control over their financial futures. This was a major breakthrough in a society where women had little legal autonomy, and it laid the foundation for future reforms that would expand women's rights in the centuries to come. Theodora also worked to improve the legal status of women in marriage. Before her reforms, divorce was difficult to obtain, and women had few options if they found themselves in abusive or oppressive marriages. Theodora's laws allowed women to initiate divorce proceedings, particularly in cases of abuse, granting them the ability to free themselves from harmful relationships. This was a revolutionary change in a society where women had little recourse when faced with mistreatment. Theodora's advocacy for women's rights extended beyond legal reforms. She was also a vocal opponent of forced prostitution, which was widespread in the empire. She passed laws that prohibited the forced enslavement of women into prostitution and took steps to ensure that women who had been victimized in this way were given the opportunity to rebuild their lives. Another area where Theodora made a significant impact was in the protection of the poor and the destitute. Theodora's social policies were aimed at creating a more just society, one where the most vulnerable members of the population were not left to suffer in poverty and neglect. In a world where wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few, Theodora sought to address the needs of the poor by establishing charitable institutions, including hospitals, orphanages, and shelters. These institutions provided care for the sick and the homeless and helped to alleviate some of the suffering caused by the empire's vast inequalities. Theodora's social welfare policies were a direct response to the growing poverty and social unrest in the empire, and they marked a significant shift toward a more compassionate and inclusive approach to governance. While Theodora's reforms were groundbreaking in their impact on women and the poor, her influence was not limited to social and legal matters. She also played a key role in shaping the religious policies of the Byzantine Empire, which during Justinian's reign was marked by intense doctrinal disputes and efforts to establish religious unity. Theodora's approach to religious tolerance was pragmatic and inclusive. She was particularly sympathetic to the Monophysites, a Christian sect that rejected the orthodox belief in the dual nature of Christ. Although Justinian was firmly committed to enforcing the Nicene Creed as the official doctrine of the empire, Theodora advocated for the protection of Monophysites from persecution. This was a bold stance at a time when religious uniformity was seen as a cornerstone of imperial authority. Theodora's willingness to protect religious minorities was a testament to her belief in justice and her understanding of the complexities of governance in a diverse and multifaceted empire.